Turn that.
Yeah, good question.
Hello. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I can't hear you. But that might be on our end.
Nope, it's on my end. I was muted, but it took me a minute to wake it up the screen to get my mute back. All right, I have as an attendee but not in Liz and Marilyn Stevenson. Do you want me to promote Marilyn?
Yes,
Or is
please.
she just okay.
We're expecting Chris on Zoom tonight too.
We are expecting Chris Kushel as well on Zoom.
Okay. Right, there we go.
He could roll up and grace us with his presence, but I don't think he's gonna be. Hi, sir. Marilyn.
How are you?
Why is the pending?
Do we know what time we're expecting, Chris?
No, I'm sure he was in. City. Mike Coffey and Pete Martin, they will not be in attendance tonight. Has anybody heard from Anna? Nope. Or John? Okay.
Isn't it the start of football season? Yeah.
Marilyn, did you test your audio?
Say that
Can you hear
again.
me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you,
Yes.
yeah.
All right, I just heard back from Chris. He says his new computer, microphone isn't working, restarting beyond a few minutes. Yes, it looks different.
While we're waiting for Chris, can we just discuss a few village calendar item issues?
Sure. See why not?
Okay.
Unless, yeah, we can hold off on the public planning until this gets on, but. See, when it's live like this. All right, I think we can hear you better now. What do you got, Marilyn?
So the first one would be, if we're going to have the public workshop on October 10th, we need to put that on the village calendar because currently it is not on there. And in addition to that, the November meetings are listed for the wrong dates and the wrong times. And one of the December meetings is listed for the wrong date and the wrong time.
Marilyn, just shoot me an email with the corrections.
Perfect. Sounds like a plan. Anything else you got there, Marilyn?
That's it.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Let's see what Chris says. Okay. Jen, Chris says he's on.
Yeah, I just promoted him.
Perfect. Good evening, Chris.
Hello.
We can
Hey,
see you
Chris.
and we can hear you. Excellent. All right, so we have the vast majority of zoning advisory committee on with us. Only ones we do not have are John, Pete, and Anna. We have everyone else here, either on Zoom or in the room here. Oh, I'm sorry, and Mike. Pardon me. Thank you, Margaret. So to reiterate the agenda, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance, followed up by, now that we have Chris on the call, we can talk about the public input session on October 10th. So we can spend a few minutes there on planning that. And then for the remainder of the time, we're going to spend having Chris walk us through his first draft that he provided to us. Kind of walk us through his thoughts of how he set it up and how he is arranging the documents. There's also, I found very useful, several other documents where he was able to map, like things moved or changed or were removed. He was kind of like track changes in that regard, which is great. Then he also, which I found the most valuable, was all of our comments. He was able to kind of like take that document and comment his comments on us. So he acknowledged our input, and then he sees where that input is going within the document. So that was awesome. And so, yeah, so I think it was, I reattached that. Chris reminded me that, hey, I sent some other accompanying documents. So my second email had those additional attachments. And also, they're also in the deliverable section of Google Drive. So everything that Chris has provided is there for everyone to see. Yeah, it's all there. Yeah.
Are other people adding comments into the new code in the Google Drive?
So they can. I want to talk about that first, but let's. I was hoping that maybe Chris could walk us through,
That's something.
and then what he wants, any of his open questions first, because I know that he commented a lot, and then after he gets all of his questions and figure out, then we can probably start firing at him for our questions that we have. Like, you know, get all of Chris's questions out of the way first before we start attacking, or the document. But, so that sounds like a plan. And then public comment at the end. Do we have any comments? Moving on to our next meeting. Anything else? All right. So first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. First order of business, I carved out 10 minutes to talk about this. We do not have to figure it all out, but I think we definitely need to figure out some of the big pieces that need time, like, for example, awareness and things like that. If anything, if we need to show equipment or set the room up or get the word out. But essentially, Chris, glad you're here so you can help us plan, since you're going to help facilitate this bad boy. So October 10th, we are, just to reiterate everyone here, we have our public workshop that we're going to solicit feedback from the public on areas of the code. So that's, and I'll just kick it off, and anybody please feel free to chime in. Marilyn is doing and has done a great job of awareness and making sure that we stay on top of the proper avenues of communication. So she's pretty good at like reminding us what we need in terms of who to contact or how to best get that outreach out. So that's one avenue we need to talk about. Room logistics, what we need to facilitate this. So I was maybe hoping, Chris, you can kind of lay out the approach, how best to do that. I know in the past we talked about maybe grouping by neighborhood, because each neighborhood may have a little other niche input that they would like to make sure it gets back to the code. And then there's things like facilitation where Chris and maybe the Zach needs to help facilitate successful meeting. So those are some of the areas that I can think about that we need to talk about. We'll open up. Anyone else want to chime in or have an approach? And if not, Chris, if you want to just walk through what your thoughts are on the public workshop.
Yep, sure. So my thinking was that this workshop would essentially have two main parts to it. The first part would be a relatively brief presentation. So in terms of, you mentioned how's the room set up, I had sent an email, I think previously, to Marilyn, but essentially we just need an area with chairs for people to sit, obviously a screen and the projector. I don't know what Boston Spa might be expecting. You know, are we talking about 20 people? Are we talking about 100 people? You might have some sense for what to expect just based on other public engagements. So, you know, it might be 20 people, but you might be surprised and get a lot more. So we just want to have chairs for that. The presentation itself, generally, there would be some introductory remarks from, this could be by the mayor, would be typical, or it could be, or it could be maybe by Matt as the chair of the ZAC. And then I would give a presentation focused on what is this project, talk about very briefly what even is zoning, provide some of the issues with the current code. Why are we doing this project? Some of the initial findings, talk about the timeline and the process. And then really sort of say, well, what are all these people doing here? The main intent is to hear from them. And so the second part of the program would be what we often call like an open house style event. And so really all we need for that is just open space for people to walk around. And I would have easels and essentially poster boards with printouts focused on a number of different topics where we want people to provide their input. There's a couple of questions that I have for the committee in terms of how to do that, but that's the general format of the event, subject to your all comments.
Okay, I like the approach. Thoughts?
I think our biggest problem is gonna be getting people. Something was the last time. I don't know, I don't have a solution.
Marilyn,
Their Facebook page.
I'm sorry, it's very hard to hear. Could someone just use the microphone?
yeah, it's in the middle of the room. So Rory was saying his main concern, and so is mine, I agree, is getting people to show up. So awareness and making sure we get the word out.
For the
Yeah, so
comprehensive
that's
plan, you had-
basically everybody has gotten a copy of the press release. And
Go ahead, Marilyn.
I reported previously that we need to identify stakeholders and they need to be invited to the meeting. And then it's just a matter of whether or not that's the correct date and time. And the thing that I have flagged for all of you is that's a Thursday night before a long holiday weekend. So just, you know, so it's a bit of a, you know, a challenge to get people's attention if they're planning on going out of town for a long holiday weekend. Other than that, I did give Matt and Chris a confirmation of, you know, the space being available, the equipment that Chris has needed, and it's just a matter of how Chris wants to set the easels up, whether it's the front of the room, the back of the room, on one side of the room. But as I understand, it's just auditorium seating, and you know, there should be a number of people in attendance.
Marilyn, can you remind us for the comprehensive plan, we had a decent turnout. I was not there that night. I was online for that one. Can you remind us again what the comms plan and the strategy behind awareness was for us?
What the strategy was,
What the comms plan was?
the comprehensive plan,
No, the communication plan.
the communication plan was basically handled by Behan, and they basically had a series of illustrations. They had round tables of people who had a list of questions, as I understood it, and For those, for each table, there was a facilitator. And I had participated on the one on Zoom, and I think that was the largest group of about 30 plus people. And that was chaired by John Behan. So, you know, we basically had comments from that. Now, it would be interesting to know how Chris is going to capture feedback for this meeting. But basically what we had prior to all of this, Behan had done quite a bit of work with us with other feedback instruments prior to the public workshop. And I'll just throw it out there. I'm not sure we're even ready to say this is the best time to do a public workshop. But if, you know, if Chris can articulate what he's actually going to propose to the public, maybe I can get a little more comfortable with it, because I'm certainly not at a good comfort place right now to say I know exactly what our consultant is going to be asking the public at large to react to.
So I think in terms of, I think Marilyn brings up a good point in terms of the date being before a holiday weekend. That could be a challenge, because I think a lot of people tend to go out on Friday, and so even if they're not going away, they just don't want to have one more thing on their plate as they're planning and packing. I don't know. I mean, this is up to the committee. I'm prepared to do it on the 10th, but if there is the flexibility and you want to push it back the following week or the week after, I guess that's probably the first decision that the committee should make. I can get into what I'm envisioning for the content in terms of what to present, but I don't know if you want to first discuss the date, Matt.
Well, could you just please describe what you're actually going to present to the public in part 2, and how you by yourself will capture the feedback from the public?
Yep. So I don't expect it to be me by myself. I would expect the ZAC or members, if not all of them, at least a selection of them, to be there in attendance and staff the various stations. One of the benefits to this open house style, as opposed to, let's say, a traditional, Q&A large type of presentation, is that it allows for a lot of more nuanced and one-on-one or small group discussions, and that's where members of the ZAC would probably be coming in to help hear the thoughts of the community, address or hear their concerns, hear what they like or don't like as it relates to the zoning, and capture those and then send those off to me and my team. That's kind of generally.
So is that going to be done in a breakout format where you're going to have each ZAC member standing in front of an easel expecting to converse with people and at the same time capture their input? Or are you going to use an instrument for the public to fill out to answer questions about whatever that easel is supposed to illustrate?
Yeah, so typically what we do is, and I don't know when you say instrument exactly what you mean, but typically it's fairly, I'll call it an old school method. We have Post-it notes, we'll have sticky dots for voting on different things. People will write their comments. Most of those comments are captured by the people providing them, sticking them on the wall, on the easels or on the margins of the easels. Those are in addition to conversation. So there's sort of two parts to it. And I guess the sticky notes, that provides one type of information, the conversations provide another. So the ZAC members would be helping to explain what to do at some of the stations, because it might just, some people might need a little bit of just guidance on that. And then to talk through, and different people can have different roles. What I found is people who are in a role like of an official tend to have more of the higher level conversations. Other committee members are more comfortable just staffing a station and providing the guidance and the directions on what to do.
Yeah, that makes sense, Chris. As long as you're clear what you need from us, if we need to scribe or just you give us instructions or give the groups instructions. I thought would be best, we talked among ourselves in the past. We can break out, have little workstations based on neighborhoods. Each neighborhood may have, different feedback, and so if you want to provide us the second part of it, what you're expecting out of each little neighborhood, I'm sure we could all describe if needed. And then if there are certain areas, like if you need somebody from the zoning board or the chairing board to have specific conversations, if you can just highlight that out, and we can kind of have another breakout section and we can talk about that, however you want to do that. But I'm sure the manpower, if you want, if that's what you're looking for the Zach to do, is provide manpower, I'm sure we'd be happy and willing and able to do that. But we're just looking for direction from you, an agenda to make sure that it's successful.
Yeah, I think the thought of having it by neighborhoods is a good one. It doesn't necessarily need to be one station per neighborhood. I think sometimes we'll group it like the commercial areas is one area, residential is another, and then people can still comment within those different neighborhoods. The one thing that I think I will need from the village is a sort of a delineation of what those neighborhoods are. I know we've kind of talked about them during the tour. So that's one decision. The other decision, which we don't have to decide now, is right now your residential neighborhoods, you really only have one residential neighborhood. There's that senior one, but for the most part, there's an R1. Part of this is a decision that the village needs to make. Do you plan on having multiple or splitting that up into multiple districts to kind of align with the neighborhood?
Short answer is yes. I would table this conversation, not get into the weeds. We can talk about this when the time comes closer in terms of setup. I do want to secure a lot of the time to get through the document. So I want to spend a few more minutes talking about communication, because we have to get that communication out early and often, like as soon as like tomorrow, we can start on that. So back to the comms plan. I do remember that we did a flyer. I have some flyers still we can hand out. I'm not sure if we did posters. The mayor has a Facebook page. We have a website. What are some of the other areas that we can get the message out?
We released it through I think Ellen Nicola put it out through the BSBPA. I think that would probably be something if we can, Darvin, I don't know if we can, use any communication channels from the BSBPA, but get it out that way.
How does the BPA like give the awareness of newsletters? Okay. Okay.
Well, they do an email blast to 5,000 people on their email list.
And does that, Marilyn, I know you mentioned like stakeholders in the past, would that be the most effective or largest way to address that list of stakeholders to make them aware?
Yeah, as I talked about many months ago, probably April, I started a stakeholders list, just a database, and that would be a personal email to those folks to invite them to the meeting. But again, the bigger question is the ready for an October 10th public workshop?
Well, we debated this back and forth many times in terms of a date. And this is like, we've spent cycles on determining what's the best date. That was the one that we fell with. The backup public workshop date, if you recall, was October 3rd. So there's less than a month away. So primary date was October 10th with the backup of October 3rd. So we spent time on going back and forth on that one. So I really don't want to rehash that if we don't have to spend the time on it. Unless there's a compelling reason not to do it outside of the holiday weekends, like we're in time crunch. So I think we either bring it up to the 3rd and make a decision, or we stick with the 10th and get the comms out. So far,
Chris mentioned something about neighborhoods. If you go back to the comprehensive plan, there is a map that was in there called Land Use Vision, and it actually did articulate the various neighborhoods in the village. So you may want to think about looking at that, Chris, because that's what we had used in the past. It showed the downtown, the south end, east side, Fairground Hill, northwest, and
There's a more
Colonial
practical
Hills.
problem with organizing like that anyway, though. I agree that it's a good idea in theory. I would love if we were able to do that, but it assumes that we're able to get a relatively equal number of people from every neighborhood to show up, and I think that's extremely unlikely.
Let's table this topic. I don't want to talk more about logistics in the room. I want to talk about comms to get them out and then spend the rest of the time on the document itself, because we can easily talk about how we're going to set the room up like the minute before they walk in. What's time sensitive here is the comps. That's where we need to spend our time. What's the problem with that, Marilyn? You want to talk about what we're going to talk about in 10?
No, I think I think we really do need to talk about whether or not we're going to have a successful turnout of the village community for, and it does not take a moment to just set the room up. We actually have the room for a greater period of time to accommodate whatever the consultants need is to set the room up. It does take time. It's not a last minute throw some chairs out there. So I think there's a lot more planning that needs to happen, but if everybody's comfortable with the Thursday, October 10th, let's go with it.
Can we do the planning on the 26th of March or 26th of September? That's our next ZAC meeting. That was that's my proposal. Because it's like we're spinning our wheels here where we could use those 2 weeks to get the communications out, which I haven't even agreed on what methods we're going to use outside of Darwin and reach out to Frank's.
Well, then you put that in there, next mailer, also coming up at the next day event. That would also be, it'd be helpful. You could do some kind of coalition, but with that part of the world, also, next to the weekday, they will be like that. As far as the account,
Yeah, and I mean, I think, the mayor should be able to put something out. We can amplify it with anyone's own personal social media as well.
I put the.
Yeah.
I actually carry flyers in my car when people ask me for them and I can ask.
Me too, I do that too, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not substantially different from what we did with the comp plan. We
so.
attended, events in the park. We were at First Market with the flyers for the comp plan public workshop, and then use, social media channels and press release. But I think we've already done some press release for it. I'm sure people can still print off the flyers as well if they're running low on those.
You have a PDF you sent around, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, so anybody, okay. I like that. All right,
Can you just take out the August date and the July date and just have the 10.
Yeah, I can make a quick edit like that.
so
And
what I've heard.
remember, the village also has legal print media sources, and I don't know if they did it last time, but they should send out our joint press release for the next workshop.
I can follow up with Frank to see if we can issue that press release for our next, or is that Jen, or how is that handled in the village office?
I believe your last workshop we did it. We don't do it for like meetings and stuff, but I can do it for the next workshop.
Yeah, for like public awareness on the 10th would be, yeah.
No problem. Someone just has to put it together for me.
Yeah, the press
and that's what you
release
did
is
last-
already done.
Right. That's what you did last time. And I thought it worked fine. I don't have outcome from that. I have a list of people I send it to, I attach it, and I put it in the body, and then I send it as an attachment, and I just send it. So what those entities do with that information is not something I have control over.
That's okay.
Yeah, none of us have control over it.
Marilyn, would you mind sending that PR to Jen for dissemination?
Yeah, I did that before, and as soon
Yes.
as everyone, I'll actually send out the draft. The last time I sent it out was June 26th. I sent it to you, Matt, and I sent it to Chris, but I'll send it to the entire Zach and to Jen.
Thank you. All right, the last piece here. So far I have VPA, Darva's gonna help get that blast out. I'll follow up with Frank in his Facebook page. Jen with the village website, if you can update that as well, Jen, and then Marilyn to send Jen the PR statements so Jen can disseminate that. Everyone's personal Facebook page, you can post that. Jared is going to update the current flyer to move to omit some of the older dates to focus really on the 10-10 public input. And then the last one here, I believe somebody mentioned, I think Marilyn maybe or Darvin, Darvin, the car show, I call it Car Show Coalition. If we can have folks like with flyers walking around handing them out, I think I'm gonna be doing that.
What is the actual date of that?
Sunday,
This coming Sunday?
the Curtis Lumber one this Sunday.
Curtis Lumber is this Sunday,
Yeah.
but the VPA car show, I believe is.
What do they do work with them?
Yeah, it's the way we were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was right.
Yeah.
I always forget.
Okay. And if anybody could do that, I know I'll be attending that car show, walk around handing out flyers and things like that. That would be rather helpful as well.
The Boston website says it's happening October 13th.
Yeah. Womp womp. All right, maybe it's just Curtis Lumber this Sunday. I think I'll attend that to say hand out some flyers. Any other avenues
I can
for,
put on the 9, the community thing.
yes, please. All right, any other areas to get the word out?
You know, just so everybody remembers, it was requested previously that this workshop be advertised through the water bills. And I don't know if it's too late to do that right now, but that was Peter Martin's request at several meetings ago, and that was several months ago. So
I believe that was ixnayed by the people who handle the water bills.
Okay, good to know. All right. All right, so we've got a few avenues here. Next meeting on the 26th, in 2 weeks, we'll talk about further room setup and configuration, roles, responsibilities, and if we have to request any additional equipment or room setup, we can do that at that time.
hey, Matt, you keep referring to September 26th. Our next meeting is September 19th.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I was looking at line 24, line 23. We'll do it on, that's right, we'll do it on the 19th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong line on the spreadsheet. All right, so we will do that on the 19th. That should give us enough time to still talk about logistics and all that stuff, but communications is pretty key right now. All right, so that's 7:31. So, and if we're good here for now on the planning side, I'd like to turn the rest of the attention and the time over to Chris to step through the documents. I don't know if you want to share your screen or how you want to do it, Chris, but just if you want to give us an overall approach with your thoughts of setting it up, some of the artifacts you used, and then I was thinking a little bit about how to best get you what you need, Chris. We want to leverage you for as much as possible. We want to get as much bang for our buck out of you as possible. I think that is a general shared sentiment across Zach and stakeholders in the village, is to rely on you for a lot of this. We as a Zach do the advising, not necessarily the drafting, but we advise and guide and provide input to you. So I'm thinking through this, please, anybody can stop me, correct me if I'm wrong, or Chris, if you have a different view on things. We all have input that we are eager to share with you. My thought was, and I put this in email for all of us to hear, and I CC'd you, Chris, that it's probably best if we go through your comments first, because I know if you have open questions on your first draft, I think we would like to get those resolved first. So we're looking at your complete thought. And then the mechanism that we all could use on the Zach would be to provide our own comments in the comment field. So that way you're not seeing red line after red line on top of each other having red lines. We provide our own comments on the draft that's on our Google Drive. So that way you can look at comments and you can see who it's from, when, and what the concern is. And then you can take all those comments and you can own that language in that document. And then you can revise your own document. And then we can review as a team if that works and make adjustments going forward, if that's the approach. Does that make sense to everybody?
So keep a single version on the shared drive where we can all input our comments.
and see everyone else's.
I think that makes.
And that's where it is. So I did send an email and I'm happy to reiterate. It's under the Zach Google Drive, which anybody can access. We have read write access. Everyone else in the public only has read access. So everybody can see the document and see what we're doing. But we have edit access, so Chris can see what we're doing and we all can see that. So that way we're not messing up any language he puts in the document. We give him all the inputs and then Chris is basically the red liner, if you will. And then in subsequent meetings, we can go through and debate and talk to Chris about how he phrase things or why he put that in, and we can kind of go from there.
Just a general minor logistical, does everybody know how to use the different kinds of editing and commenting in a Google document?
I think
The
some
difference
Microsoft
between
Word.
editing and suggested editing and all of those things.
Well, we're gonna comment. We're not gonna, fair point. We're not
I
gonna
just
use
don't
our-
want somebody to go in and think, oh, I'm gonna put this X on this comment because I don't want to see it, and then they get rid of it.
That's a good point.
Just make sure that everybody has some experience with using that before we go in.
That is a very good point.
I talked to Darvin, he'll tell me how.
So I'm thinking the best way, so let's start that conversation real quick. So if you have comments of your own. If we have our own comments, highlight the section of text that you like, right click, add a comment. Do not go to someone else's comment and start typing in that.
Highlight something.
Only create your own comments by highlighting a document or area of concern, right click, add comment, and it'll see your own comment. Now, that said, if someone else has highlighted that text and have their own comment, you'll see that comment on the right. Do not feel compelled to type under that and add to their comment. You highlight the section of your concern, right click and add your own comment. That'll show up below the other person's, just it's a my one, so yeah, good point.
You can also reply to comments. Just to say, you know.
But don't accept, don't
Don't
delete,
accept it.
don't agree.
Don't resolve it.
That's right, that's the word, don't resolve, that's right. Yeah, we don't want to resolve anyone else's comments. I think that'll be left up to Chris, but we can talk about that also, but Cameron, that's it, that's good. Anything else with approach or process? Okay, Chris, take it away, sir.
Okay, so I'll talk from start off at a high level. You can see my screen. Is it being shared? You can kind of see the TOC.
Some more
Yes.
things to get going, Chris. So after the approach, we all have a lot of input to give you, but I think after you go through this, if you want to go right into your comments of like, hey, I've got open questions, and we can start marching down and using the best use of our time.
Okay, so let me just spend a minute just talking about this overall, maybe 2 minutes talking about this overall.
Absolutely, take as
So-
much time as you want.
We did speak last time that, you know, we were going to essentially be starting with a new code with a new organization, rather than try and sort of just fiddle with the existing code. And so that was the starting point that I took from it. All that being said, and as Matt said at the beginning, there have been so many comments on the existing code related to issues and things that they wanted addressed. So all of that has to find its way into this new code. And so the documents that I provided as supplements, one was a summary of a number of comments. I think one of the most probably significant ones was a few years ago, there was a zoning recommendations memo that was created. And so that had a number of recommendations. And so if you look at that document, it ties how we were addressing those specific comments. And then there were also, as part of that document, a number of interviews with some of the key users of this code, which is the building inspector, the planning board, and the zoning board of appeals. And then I also took the ZAC document and did the same process where I added a note, a column of how we were addressing the concern, if it was applicable. Broadly speaking, then, in this new table of contents or new organization, I'd say that there are 3 main buckets of areas. Articles 1 through 3 are essentially what I would say are introductory provisions. Articles 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that's the one. So that right now is mostly placeholders. That's going to be all the meat of what this code is. What are the districts? What can you build in the districts? What uses? How much parking? Etc. A lot of that is going to be informed by from looking at your comprehensive plan. A lot of it's going to be informed by what we hopefully will get from the feedback from the community. So that's why we're holding off on putting that together. And then I think that the ZAC, this is really as key sort of stakeholders and representatives of the community. This is the area where I would personally probably recommend seeing the ZAC spending the majority of its time or many of the members for the recommendations and the comments. Not to say you can't for the rest of it, but Articles 10 through the end, this really relates to the how. So this is process related. In my sort of experience, really, the people that are going to be most concerned with this, it's not going to be the general public. I'm not even sure it's really going to be many of the members of the ZAC. I think it's really the key users of this document. And again, it's the planning board, it's the zoning board, as well as the building inspector. And that's, so I'll kind of leave it to you to the extent that you all want to make comments on it. But I would, I guess, recommend being deferential to what those users sort of think is going to best, because it's really what works, because they're the ones that have to actually use this, and that's use this from a process perspective. So, if you want now, if there are any certain kind of questions or comments, otherwise I will just go through and find where my comments are and ask them that if that's how you want to handle it. You can handle this.
Yeah, makes sense so far. You got
Okay.
the floor.
All right, so, again, just starting from the purpose, this is something that I would just consider kind of boilerplate. So you're all, I took a shot at this, use some precedents. You're all welcome to make text edits, or comments, add things, tell me things that we should take away. It's not really going to make a material difference in the outcome of what gets built, but you're all welcome to do that. My first question, so this was again from a precedent from another recent example where they have this section 1.4. The basic point of this section is to say there's going to be this overlap where people are used to the current code or have projects that maybe were approved under the current code, and then we're going to have this future code. So how is it handled? This section is intended to summarize that. My main question is, does this really belong in the zoning code? I feel like this is something that's going to be useful and applicable for maybe a year or two. And I'm just wondering if we want to pull this out and have this sort of as a separate sort of addendum policy that can be on the website supplemental to the code.
Chris, this example of summary or a checklist, does this have to stay in lockstep with the code, or is this kind of like a cheat sheet for folks to use to help navigate the waters?
It's the latter, really. It's more of a cheat sheet, I'd say.
So it sounds like if this is part of essentially law, it's going to be a procedural nightmare to keep this up to date. I would recommend keeping this a separate artifact so it can be maintained outside of this. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm curious what Rory is, if I get to see if Rory's in the room or not.
Yeah,
but-
he's hiding in the corner, Chris. How are you? I don't have a problem with this table. I think we need to study it and determine whether or not it does formally belong in the code as law, or if it doesn't, how it would be utilized to be, for lack of a better term, legally used. In short, we're changing a bunch of things which I think are necessary to do. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing if we codify them into the code. That's my humble opinion. Because as a user, that's all we do is go into the code to dig for the detail when we have a case come before us. And we kind of need all of those bits and pieces in there in order to be able to do that. Now, if it was a all-encompassing checklist, that'd be swell. Whether or not you then make that an addendum like the area and bulk schedules would be, I think, entirely up to you. I don't know if that helped any, but that's sort of how I see it.
So maybe then, unless there's other thoughts, we leave it in for now. It's obviously, we can always pull it out later. It's not a hard thing to pull out, but it will just require, I think, again, this group probably individually, to take a look and see if it makes sense or if something needs to be changed. I think it's probably okay as it is.
Chris, I don't want to dwell too long on this because I know there's a bunch. The way I'm reading it, if there's a permitted use in the current code and in the new code, that use is prohibited in that district, it becomes non-conforming. Is that right?
Correct.
And the same logic applies then. A permitted use that's still a permitted use does not change. Permitted use that's now special permitted use as the requirement of additions and enlargements.
Yes.
and becomes non-conforming. Okay.
And I think that's what agree with that.
Okay. This was just a note, not really, but just to draw your attention. So one of the things, there's going to need to be a lot of work on definitions. And then that I think will make sense to take place a little bit later on. Right now, most of the definitions are just what you currently have in there. Although we have removed some of the ones that we know aren't necessary. I'm recommending that we sort of split the definitions into two different sections. So there's definitions related to the code, and then there's a separate section that'll be definitions of uses, which will be in the uses chapter. So I'm putting that, obviously, if you all don't like that and you want it all together, we can do that. This is something that's being done increasingly more common, and I find it's a nice division of definitions. We had some issues related to building height, so I put in a new example of a building height to address some of the issues. So again, that's something I just want to draw attention to. Matt, do you want me to actually walk through these comments or only for when I have questions?
I think I'm interpreting these comments as, hey, Zach, I need your help. What do you want me to do in a certain scenario? That's how I see these comments.
Okay.
So it may make sense to step through. If you need something, if you need something from us, let us know via the comments.
Okay. Some of these comments are just sort of things just to kind of draw your attention to, but not something I'm looking for
Okay.
right now. So I'm just noting signage is going to be completely updated here. I'm just noting it for you all not to dwell on what is the definition of a sign today, because that's something that
So
will be updated.
can we go back up to the top of Article 2, general definitions?
Sure.
So where you said you to discuss if we're gonna bifurcate, that comment where you had, that comment, to either
Yep.
bifurcate. And, so I made a note here just to, let's see, so you're gonna list out all the definitions, or all of the definitions that you need input from the ZAC. But I think the general expectation is for you to reach out and do the industry standard boilerplate definitions that you're gonna run with, and then come to the ZAC if there are any specific ones that you want our input on. That was just my comment.
That is correct, yes. And again, this is why the reason I was putting this note here is if you as the ZAC says, I don't like the way you're organizing this with two separate sections of definitions, we don't have to do that. I just wanted to let you know, because it is different from your current code.
I'm not hearing anything right now about splitting it up. I don't know if we have a strong opinions either way.
I don't have a strong opinion right now, but
I like it all in one place. And I think that if there is a way, for example, when we get into some of the meat and potatoes of the actual code where a definition is utilized, it might be asterisked or in some fashion identified as in the actual definition section, so that anyone using the code would be, if they didn't exactly understand what the words meant in the code itself, they would know that it was in the definitions they could go there. Just a thought.
Capture that comment. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
There's a question to me of, are the use definitions only present in the section related to uses, or do they appear in other places? And if they appear in other places, then I think they need to be in the general.
Yeah, they do. They appear in a lot of places. Okay, and then there's places where they should appear. They don't. But again, that's all part of the placeholders, which are the to me, that's another word for problem, because those are the big areas. that we really have consensus, bullet points to go to Chris that says, this is what we think we should do. Because I don't believe we're writing this, okay? What we're trying to do is identify the areas that are problematic. Now that we've got a framework, thanks to Chris's first draft, to work with. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, Chris, the splitting the definitions, what's the reasoning for doing it that way?
Yeah, the reason is twofold. So one is because there's so many definitions, it just sort of splits up just for, you know, again, I think just conceptually for people to think through, okay, if I need to know how we're doing building height, that's one thing. But if I need to know how are you defining, I don't know, a tattoo parlor, that's a use and that's there. The other aspect that I particularly do like, but again, I'm just giving my advice and I'm happy to do it, whatever you all want. If I get down to let me just go to where the uses are. In the use standards section, there would be all kind of consolidated, the uses, the definition, and standards, because often we have different requirements or standards. So here we would have, here's the definition of the use, and here are the specific standards that we have with whatever that use is. So right now we just have the adult uses, because that was an area of concern, and so I put that in for now because I had that. But there could be standards for mixed use development or other things like that, and so it was all consolidated. But again, this is something, once everything's filled in, I'm very happy to cut and paste and put everything back into one. It's not a hard thing to do, but that was the logic.
So Chris, quick question on the organization of these definition sections. Is this based on your professional opinion, or is this being modeled after another community that you've worked with?
Well, it's both. So these, you know, we're not recreating the wheel. There are plenty of precedents out there. So this is relying on recent precedents in New York that I think provides a good framework for organizing and for using the zoning code.
Perfect. All right, let's keep rolling.
So all of this, as I mentioned before, is our placeholders for now, and that's sort of the next phase of work. So starting in Article 10, then, what we talk about is, here are all the review authorities that have a role in either advising or making decisions as it relates to the code. And so for each one, it has different sort of list of what is, you know, here's the planning board, what's the membership. Here, there are some new provisions, such as having a mandatory training. So these are things that there's, you know, the appointment to the number of terms. These are things that, in this case, the planning board really needs to look at and decide whether, you know, whether this makes sense, whether things need to be changed or not. You know, again, anybody's welcome to comment on it, but I just think in general, it's these individual groups that probably want to be wordsmithing these sections.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on this, only because there was a significant change in the language in the historic district. And I'm just wondering, Chris, if you realize that when that change was made, it essentially caused the village of Ballston Spa not to be eligible for the state of New York's program for a certified local government for historic preservation. That would have, that if that change had not been made, that would have been an opportunity for the village to actually participate in a series of financial assistance and technical assistance through the State Historic Preservation Officer, but I see that there's been some major changes that have negatively impacted the 40-year history of the historic district. And maybe you could just explain how that happened, because
Yeah.
it's a
So
significant
this is a
change.
good example for, our opportunity to sort of, note my role here as a consultant is I'm not here making any sorts of decisions. I, take the direction that I'm given by the village and so as it relates to the Historic Commission, that this is what I was essentially told is the direction that the village is going. And so it was written accordingly. And so again, I'm agnostic as to how you all
So
structure.
Chris-
Well, the zoning advisory
there's-
committee has not made any such recommendation. And for them to adopt something like this, I think would be disastrous. The village is big on trying to do economic development in the community, as evidenced by a recent project for the Brownfields Opportunity Grant. And that major change for the historic district language in our code basically invalidates an opportunity for the village of Ballston Spa to obtain a stream of funding for homeowners and for business owners in the village of Ballston Spa. So I think that's maybe an example of why the ZAC has more work to do in conversing with one another, because we have had no such consensus to make that happen. And this is just one item. We've essentially had months of meetings where we're meeting in small silos, talking about things, but not exchanging that information with one another. And I would hate for us to go into this draft that you've prepared, which is supposed to be processed, with some understanding that the ZAC has somehow told you this is the way it's supposed to be, and it is not. Because we've not had that
You raised a
discussion.
good point, Marilyn, on several topics about collaboration, and there's only so many days of the year that we can get together and share, what we've learned in our mini groups at the beginning of the year. I would recommend that's a personal responsibility that we have to share if you want something to talk amongst themselves, unless we want to start meeting every other day to do so and go methodically through every single person's perspective on it. That's one way to do it. But
No,
I
I think we just need to have some open and honest
yeah, but
conversations.
the issue is when,
Instead of
based on our
special
schedule, when would you want to have that done?
Instead
When
of
would you like to have that
special
done, based on
interest
how many
groups
we have
working behind the scenes, making decisions. We're an advisory group.
No one's made any
And,
decisions.
Basically.
But you do raise a good point, though. You raise a good point. So you do mention that there's a historic local government certification through the State Historic Preservation Office. There are requirements in order to retain that certification. And I think that's where we need to focus and have Chris go back and better understand what are those requirements for the certification, and make sure that whatever language is adopted, proposed, implemented, that we adhere to those certifications. So I think, based on Marilyn's really good point, if Chris, if you could take that back and better understand what are some of the requirements of certification, because that's the last thing we want to do, is change something and blow it up to put us in a worse position than we are. I think that's generally agreeable to everybody. So if that makes sense to everybody, Chris, if you can just take that one back and see what the requirements are. And so maybe we can talk about that in another meeting going forward.
Yeah, and I can share that with Chris and the rest of the ZAC.
Yeah, I think, it would be if Maryland has those requirements that you need to have ensured that they're in the zoning code, then we can put them in. I think that would be the best way.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, but also, Chris, make sure you confirm there's no other requirements or is anything else from the state that we need to be mindful of. We want to make sure your expertise is informing us. All right, thank you for that, Marilyn.
Okay, so that's, I'm just gonna keep scrolling through and see if there's any specific questions as opposed to, this is just here, there's this little provision related to conflicts. if you know, again, this is something if the village has, your village attorney would know, or or the mayor would know, if there is some specific provision in that's not in your zoning code, but some other code that relates to conflicts, we can put that in here. If not, we'll just delete this provision. It's a fairly minor point.
What page is that, Chris? 65.
That's 65, but this is under the zoning board. This a similar thing is under the planning board.
Anybody have any opinion on that?
Just that the ZBA is ultimately the board in the village that deals with appeals from wherever they come from in connection with an appeal to, you know, something happening with zoning. So, and I reviewed it and I think it's already in there, so.
That specific question, we're gonna have to go back through and possibly talk to the village lawyer about what else is in there, because I mean, there are a number of different things that I imagine could be in that specific spot.
No question.
And do we know which attorney for the village will actually be providing assistance to the ZAC for this language? Will it be Carla, who provides assistance to the trustees, or will it be Stephanie, who provides assistance to at least, you know, some of the boards?
Great question.
It'll be both. That would be my. That firm probably will involve other lawyers in the review of the final document. I don't think it was just the Carla that step. It would be my bet.
You know, that's actually a good point. I want to just raise just for awareness. I think the zoning advisory committee is an advisory committee where we provide input. Chris drafts and writes this, but I think once our job is done, we take our recommendation, essentially draft recommendation, and provide it to legal, and let legal legalese it. I mean, right, wrong, or different. They're going to take this and turn it on its head, and they're going to just 6 ways to know. And then from there, and at that point, I don't know if there's any other step in the process, but the ultimate goal is to take this and then put it in front of the village board, and then they have an opportunity to change and move things. So our objective is
They'll also use.
okay, so, and then maybe after legal or before legal, somewhere after us, engineers will take a look at this to make sure.
Well, they have a whole, Labella, the village engineers, have a complete division that does nothing but zoning. So they'll be involved, I'm sure, at that point before it finally gets to.
So I guess my point is, we should focus, our purview is to make recommendations, not draft the thing, but our best bet is to take our collective input, because we know down the road it's going to, whatever we say is going to be changed anyway, to a certain degree or another. So I think that's a good point about legal's going to get involved if we look something over that we didn't even think about. All right, so to this point, all right, any other comments on this? Chris, do you need any other clarity at the moment from us on this comment?
I mean, I think, you know, just looking at the comments I have here, I can keep going through it, but I don't know if it's as good of a use of time as you all, since you're all going to be looking at it yourselves anyway. You'll see the comment and can respond as necessary. It's up to you.
Well,
Right?
well, we're here, so
I think there are a lot of things that we'll all have opinions on, like the one that you have on the screen right now. I think we might all have different opinions on. The question is, are there things that you need answers for now in order to keep working?
that's exactly where I want to go with that. Yes. What do you need from us so you guys can keep grinding away in that draft? And then later,
All
we
the
can
other
provide
things,
our-
we're all gonna write comments
That's-
into the document.
That's right.
So all the comments that I have and questions right now are on the elements that you all would be looking at and commenting on. The next section that we'll be working on is sort of that, what I said, that middle section is like the what. And so I don't have any questions on that yet because, you know, we'll be getting the information from the community. Will have to be, you know, there's going to be a number of questions about what's appropriate uses and whatnot. A lot of that you've already provided in the, because you've all reviewed the use table, for example. So we have lots of stuff to get started with, and we will have a lot more once we have the community forum. So all of that stuff is going, we'll have a number of probably similar questions and comments like this. But it won't come till later. It'll come after the forum, after we've had a chance to digest that information from the forum, synthesize it, and then put it into a draft code for you all to react to.
Okay, so to Kamran's point, if there is nothing else you need from us to weigh in now in terms of answers from your comments, we can set a arbitrary deadline between now and before the next iteration that you provide us for the ZAC to get our comments in that document for you. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
I'd assume we want anything commented by, at least by the workshop, if not earlier. But I don't know, Chris, if
I would think we would, this seems like a lot to ask, but I would think we would want to discuss all of the comments before the
before the
workshop.
workshop,
If that actual document is going to be presented to the public.
that's a fair point. Yeah.
I would not expect this document to go to the public for the workshop. I think with the information that is in this code is not going to be of particular interest or relevance to the general public.
Well then, Chris, I think one of the things you have to clarify for us is the subject matter or the content you're going to pose to the public. Otherwise, I'll go back to my original concern. I don't think we're ready yet. You either have to frame the issue for the public and tell us what that is,
What are we trying to get out of
because
it?
we have not done that for ourselves as a zoning advisory committee.
The physical printout for zoning 101 would be promoted. Okay. I think if the objective is to get good public turnout and public info, we better have some meat and potatoes to give them. I tend to agree with Marilyn, we may not be there yet. We've got a lot more to talk about.
I mean,
I was gonna say, I think you might be discounting the appetite of the public to come complain.
Well, I'm not discounting that at all.
Absolutely.
Because the
And-
comprehensive plan turned
Exactly.
out, and their input session, that was successful, that was popular.
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to-
I hear, like, I agree. I'd love to get a sense from Chris on what we're going to be sharing with the public, and maybe that happens in our next meeting. But I also think, the advertising campaign, zoning 101 is a great tool for people to get prepared for the workshop, but nobody likes doing homework. So they want to come to the public workshop and voice their opinions, whether or not they're informed of it.
Exactly.
I also expect that,
Had questions when when we were talking, I'd be like, can we, and I was like, no, I was just telling you about it. That doesn't come until October.
Yeah.
I also expect that as we all start putting comments in this document, there are going to be places where we as a group are farther apart than others.
That's where we have to spend time.
That might be a good place to pick and choose the places where we want to get more.
100%.
So
The types of things that we generally, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna suggest, should we get comments in there by the 19th? By our next meeting?
I would definitely support that. I guess the other question is, are the other sections going to be ready first?
Well, and
Is that necessary?
I don't think, so Chris, like the zoning districts, the uses, those are gonna come after the workshop, right? After we've received public input?
Yes.
Yes. So I think we're in a state now where the draft is gonna be this draft through the workshop. And if we're able to come to the next meeting with all of our comments in there, we can spend however much time we need on the logistics of it and then, dig in.
Well, Chris, isn't it your intention that some of the heavier lift items like signage and district boundaries and other things outside of procedural things in this current draft, you're looking for the public to weigh in on those anyway to inform you on your next draft, right?
Yeah, I mean, signage is a very specific thing that it would be generally more of like Chamber of Commerce might have opinions on that. What I would be looking for the community to sort of weigh in on is things that they don't need to know the specifics of the zoning or the zoning code, right? We want to know, do you like this kind of, so one thing that we often do on these kinds of things is we'll do what's called a visual preference survey. So it's for your downtown. We'll have a whole bunch of photos of like mixed use and commercial buildings, historic, contemporary, and people will say like what buildings they like, what don't they like. And it helps inform the zoning of, okay, in the downtown, this is based upon what people like, by the number of votes, we can know, okay, people don't want a 5-story building, for example. They like 3-story buildings, they like traditional architecture, they like peaked roofs, based upon where we're seeing the high number of votes. That kind of information then gets put into the dimensional requirements and design standards for that district. The general public doesn't really need to know about the district or the way it works to all that much. They are just commenting on what they like and what they don't like, and it's our job then to codify that.
So Chris,
Well,
I
that'll
think
be a
what we're-
repeat of what we did with the comprehensive plan workshop.
So Chris, what I think what I'm hearing from you is you have an idea of what content you want to put in front of the audience and what you're expecting or what you would like to get out of public members. I think probably would put us at ease as a Zach would if we could see like a very specific agenda of what areas that you want out of the meeting would probably put us at ease. If you have, it sounds like you have some semblance of that.
Yeah, but just to Marilyn's point, I mean, if this isn't intended to recreate the wheel or relitigate the comprehensive plan. So if this type of thing was already done, then we might need to rethink our approach a little bit. You know, this is kind of operating under the assumption. So often comprehensive plans are very high level. Like, here's our overall goal. Like, we want a vibrant downtown, for example, right? And now the zoning is, let's figure out how to use the zoning as a tool to implement that goal. But if your comprehensive plan already went to this level of really thinking that through, taking it to that next level, that's great. I think we need to spend some time then to really rethink that, because maybe then there should be a different approach where we do sort of say, here is your visual preference survey that you did for your comprehensive plan. Here is your zoning now, a draft zoning to implement that. What do you think of that? It's a different approach. We could do that. If we do that, I think then, to Marilyn's point, I honestly think we do need more time, because that takes a lot more technical effort of actually thinking through what is going in each district, as opposed to just tell us what kind of buildings you like. So I think this is worth having a.
Marilyn's spot on, Chris. We did exactly that exercise, and I think in the appendix to the comp plan, it includes the actual results of it. I can try to look through it and crib those pages so that you can see them and determine if it was an exercise that, you know, if it'd be duplicative.
Did you get into topics such as accessory dwelling units, for example? That's often a hot button topic. Short-term rentals is another emerging topic.
Yeah, they were discussed. I'm not sure if they were quantified in the same manner as like the visual preference survey was. So I can take a look back at the comp plan and see how far we did get with it, Chris, and try to get that to you later this week, so that we can make a relatively quick decision on this.
Because we could do a combination of asking some more open-ended, like broader questions, like what do you think about ADUs? What concerns do you have? What are some of the emerging topics you care about? And then some more specific, here's our draft based upon what we've heard from the comprehensive plan. That's a reasonable approach.
Okay.
Yeah, during the comprehensive plan, I do recall we touched on the topic. We discussed the possibility of ADUs in certain neighborhoods, but that's where we left it. And as a ZAC, we have not even materially discussed that subject or come to a recommendation or consensus on it.
Yep, agreed.
And I would expect the ZAC to make that recommendation after hearing from the public sort of workshop.
I think that's accurate.
In the short-term rentals, there's a new state law that passed, isn't it? It's just awaiting the governor's signature. So to during Airbnb or something like that. And charging a fee and making it a little more difficult and people and a little more enforcement of it.
That's interesting. It's what we want.
Like them, that's why, because houses are vacant and waiting for somebody to come when There's a housing shortage.
All right, so that, I do like that approach, like, we need to. Yeah, I like that approach about making sure we have an agenda together for what we want out of public hot topics. Gary, you said you're gonna look into the comp plan anyway.
It would be as simple as looking at the placeholder. Because those are the empty spots we don't have answers.
If we wanna put some time on the calendar, our next meeting to do that,
I think we should. I think that is the topics that we really would need the most input on. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that the downtown business people would love to talk about signs. I think that people who have accessory dwelling units that are pre-existing non-conforming would like to get some definition of how they're gonna be handled in the future. I think, the whole procedural matter of what you do and how you get a building permit and what you need to have. Most of the things are not necessarily spelled out in here, they're placeholders, and we should be addressing it. Because
Sounds like-
that's the hard part. Because right now, I'll use signs as the hot part, because it's easier to explain. We have a lunatic sign provision, all right, that says if a change in tenancy takes place, then the signs that are there have to be reviewed. And the building inspector won't issue a permit until the planning board meets and approves the signs that are already there to be there again with a different name on it. That, to a businessman, is mad and frustrating and completely unnecessary. Conversely, we have our sign law says you can't have a sign bigger than 16 square feet. You can only have one per business. Well, right up and down downtown and everywhere else, you're going to find a lot of signs that are bigger than 16 square feet, and you're going to find a lot of business with more than one sign. You need to have some indication from the public of what they prefer, and then figure out how to codify that so that we have an ordinance that actually makes sense.
so it sounds like our agenda for the 19th, our next meeting is forming. We talked earlier on about addressing Maryland's items about logistics and room setup and things we need. We want to talk about communication, make sure we can get the board out as fast as possible. So we'll talk about that next meeting. We'll also talk about the detailed agenda of specific topics to engage the public on. Not necessarily on the draft, but what we need to inform subsequent.
I think it would be extremely important for that meeting that you invite the building inspector. Almost insist that the building inspector be present, as well as the zoning attorney, Steph Bitter. Because they, especially the building inspector, knows more about where the problems lie in terms of the code than anyone, because he gets first bite at it. Stephanie could be helpful in helping us form some of these concepts, I would think, as we work towards getting our bullet points together. For this to be a new.
Yep.
That make any sense?
Put that on my to-do list to reach out for building inspector and zoning attorney.
Well, I can, or I'm more than happy to do that,
Yes, please.
okay?
So are you thinking more that this forum then would just be sort of like, here's the topic, signs, tell us your concerns? It's certainly, we can do it. It's gonna be different than, I think, how I was envisioning this originally.
How are you in it? If this is the type of input we're thinking, what are you thinking we should look at?
Well, like I said, originally, not realizing that a lot of this work might have already been done, it's just, in my experience, the public doesn't care about so much of these sort of nitty-gritty things, like getting a building permits. Individuals will, but everybody cares about what their neighborhood looks like. Everybody cares about what the downtown is. Everybody cares about how they get around the neighborhood or the community. These are the kinds of sort of higher level things that I found that the general public tends to weigh in on. And then a lot of these details about signage, process, that's where it comes in, the specific stakeholders. So like often the Chamber of Commerce type of people, or maybe the Downtown Business Association, they would be very interested in reviewing the signage by code or providing input on that. It's more of like a specific stakeholder that's providing input as opposed to the general community event.
Could I give you an example of one thing that might illustrate how to engage the public at the next public workshop? You spent a lot of time in this first draft, which was supposed to be process oriented, but you spent a lot of time discussing an adult business use. How about asking the community if that's what they want in the village, or where it should be located?
Yep,
Or what-
the where is
What
fine.
zoning considerations?
Right, and absolutely,
to-
that's absolutely appropriate to ask, where
Yeah.
should uses be located? Those provisions that are in the zoning code need to be in there regardless. We need to regulate them. We need to at least allow them somewhere. So again, this is a good example. The community might ask, say, hey, where, if we have to put it somewhere, where do you want to stick it?
So the Zach had asked this question earlier in the various breakout sessions, and the question was, why do we have to have it to begin with? We know it's in there right now. We know where the location is, but why do we have
Legally
to have
required,
the
Darla.
full complement?
As I've cited, this is, as my understanding is, this is a settled Supreme Court First Amendment issue. So every community has to allow it somewhere. Doesn't mean that you will have it, but you have to allow it, and you can have a certain number of restrictions over that.
And we have to allow every single use, from educational to theatrical to performance.
I'm speaking about
to-
adult uses.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah, I think
so,
I think that's a great example of what the public needs to know, you know, in a workshop like that.
all right, so we are, it's 8:20, 20 minutes over our typical time. I want to start thinking about the 19th in the agenda, the 19th. I don't know how you guys feel, y'all feel about this, but I'm not fully settled on an approach for the 10th. And I think by the 19th, we can spend a lot of the time, if not most of the time, on that topic to make sure we have an agenda. Sounds like there's a hybrid approach, or sounds like Chris has a different way of doing it. We have some hot topics we want to bring to the public. Why don't we use the majority of the 19th to hash that out and determine if we have enough for the 10th or not? And then based on the next meeting, we either determine we proceed with our agenda for the 10th, or we push it and come up with a better agenda and see how that input is going to be found its way back into a document later down the path. Also talking about room logistics and how we want to set up and facilitation logistics. So those are the two items I had for the 19th. To come on to your point, does it make sense to set a deadline of the 19th or prior to the 19th to have all of our comments for this iteration on the shared draft, on the drive, on the Google Drive? Does that make sense for everybody? John and Marilyn, does that make sense?
That's kind of a rush, but you know,
Well, if you have, I mean, if I'm sure everybody already has notes, we can start just typing our notes into that document at that point. And now that said, this isn't like set it and forget, we'll never come back to this. We're gonna have, you can comment in the anywhere in the document going forward at any time. I think it's just our first round of queued up comments to this point, just make their way into the document by the 19th, so that way Chris can see them.
Matt, I will send you an example of a different zoning forum that I did and show you those materials for the boards for you to look at, and so you could see what we did at another similar project that we did recently, and the kinds of questions we were asking and the kinds of information we were getting.
Yes, but can you see that's a whole Zach? I think that's a good one. So agree on the zoning forum. That's definitely need to do that. One other action item I have here, Chris, so Meryl's gonna send you the requirements for local government certification for the historic districts. So also anything that make sure that is the holistic picture. Because the last thing we want to do is put ourselves in a worse position. So want to make sure we are working within the bounds of those requirements. All right, so that sounds good. Last topic is public comment. Anybody in the room or Zoom that has public comment that they'd like to make?
Hello, Chris, I'm Ben Baskin. I'm a trustee with the village and very interesting conversation. Thanks. So is that the mic? All right. I agree with what the Zach's saying about it's important to have some questions, some prompts for the public to then respond to. And I also agree with what you're saying about it should probably be too specific in the weeds, but they need something. So it would be helpful to say, oh yes, let's talk about it.
Did we lose it?
We lost it.
That was abrupt. Yeah, he's gone. So maybe they will come back in. Hold on, let me tell him he's gone. Ben's probably still in there, just to keep talking. Let's see. We lost you.
It didn't time out, did it?
It might have. No, Zoom didn't.
We're still on.
We're fine. But he totally dropped.
Yeah, it could be the Wi-Fi at the extension office.
You guys are really late. I mean, not that but you guys usually wrap it up at 8. So maybe, I don't know if there's a limit that I'm not familiar with. Sorry, rebooting, almost back up. The battery died. Okay. So we'll wait for them for a minute. Hold on, there he is. Change role to panelist. All right, we'll see what happens in a minute.
All right.
You're back.
The piece about the ethics or the planning board, and there's it looked like some ethics related kinds of things about refusals. I didn't read it too well, but you should refer to the ethics code potentially, because some of that language may be covered there already, or at least it's worth reading to see if it does. I do encourage the ZAC to come up with as specific language as you can, even though it has to go through legal, whatever. We are, someone who helped write the RFA and visualize this process. We are looking for this board specifically to basically hand us something that is very close to what we need. Not something that needs to go through multiple steps after that. Although obviously there are some steps after that. We don't, for example, have any plans to engage Labella significantly in this process. We are our village, engineers, and they probably maybe get some 2 cents, but not like we have a budget to spend on them for this process. That's what this process is supposed to do. And the other thing I heard that was a little concerning, if you're making major changes to the current code, for example, with the historic district, it really should be, again, the vision is that this board talks out these things publicly together into consensus that things are not done and decided behind with the other people who are not the ZAC at this point in time, between meetings or significant are done, and then the board has to say who did this, how did this happen. It should all be very clear to all the board members what's in there and what's not in. So that's how we were thinking about it when we thought of it like you guys. But I want to thank you very much for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll also help on this. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. Anyone else on the call? Any other comments, Jen?
Liz has her hand up, so let me grab her and bring her in. Allowed to talk.
Hi,
Hello,
Liz.
can you hear
We can
me?
s- Yep, we can hear you.
I'm glad Chris addressed the sexual oriented business section because that was presented in some detail. And I assume there's one meeting I missed, you instructed him to, put out actual language for that. But I was wondering, I don't remember the group ever discussing PDDs. And there was a rather detailed section in there with the PDD. Some municipalities are doing away with having PDDs because of some of the projects that have resulted from them. But I would like to see that put on the list for, residents to understand what is a PDD and how it might affect what gets developed in the village. And is that something the majority of residents in the village desire?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Anyone else, Jen? If not, call the
Hold
wrap.
on, I'm getting there. I only have access to so many things at one time. No, nobody else can Zoom.
Excellent. Thank you for the support, Jen. We appreciate it. We'll chat soon. Thank you, everybody.
No
Chris.
problem. Have a
Chris,
good
thank you so
night.
much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You got it.
Thanks.
Good night.